Hello and welcome to the KIMIYA Healing Podcast. Today I'm going to talk about what to do when we start to feel that we're getting ill and how we can support ourselves physically and also energetically. The first thing to say is that by the time we've experienced a physical imbalance or an illness at a physical level, there have been many opportunities to resolve this and to come back into balance that we have missed. This is the central premise of this podcast, and if you hold that in mind, you will start to be able to not just prevent yourself from getting ill, but also when you are ill, you will start to be able to mitigate the impact so that you don't end up in a position where you are either having to take medication or where you're having to go into hospital or where you're taking time off work because you're feeling ill. So first of all, I've been practicing this for several years now, and I haven't even had a common cold. And in my 20s, I was constantly experiencing chest infections. And I tried everything to try to get rid of these chest infections. Every time a winter would come in London, I would end up, and it would start with a cold, then it would graduate into quite a bad cough and chest pain, and after a couple of weeks or 2.5 weeks, I would end up with a full-on chest infection. And this would repeat itself every year, every winter. And I looked into different options, and I even tried Chinese herbal medicines. And in the end, I didn't really find anything too effective. But I was noticing that I was having to take considerable time off to recover from these chest infections. And at one point, I had to take about 7 days off work, which is quite a long time, especially back then I was working in the corporate world. And it's quite a long time to take off work, especially in an environment where it's not really acceptable to take a sick day. You're quite a high pressure corporate environment. So since then, I started to become more curious about what I was doing that was leading to this repeated experience, because I figured that if something was repeating, it meant that I hadn't actually resolved the root cause. For me, part of that root cause was stress, and for many of us, the way that we relate to our bodies and the time and space we make for our bodies is compromised when we're stressed and by stressful life experiences. So what can we do when we start to feel that we're getting ill? One practice that I've been doing regularly over the last few years and has prevented me from even having a cold, let alone a chest infection, is whenever I feel the slightest subtle indication that I am feeling a little bit more run down than normal, or that there's a twinge of a physical sensation or symptom starting to arise, I will immediately activate all of my toolkit. I will immediately drop into this place of awareness that, okay, my body is asking me for something. I am obviously not giving it what it needs. I'm obviously not giving my emotional body what it needs, and now is a time, before this becomes something big, that I need to figure out what it is that I need. So recognizing that by the time your body is starting to give you signs, you have forgotten or strayed from your inherent need and balance. Now, we do this all the time, and this can be the need for stillness, this can be the need for space, it can be the need for time for ourselves, it can be the need for relaxation often, it can be the need for supporting ourselves nutritionally with a more balanced diet. And sometimes when we are stressed and busy, these things go out the window very quickly, and we forget that actually what we're consuming and trying to digest and absorb every single day has an effect on our health, and that includes stress. So the second thing that I'd like to share that I also practice is every single day, especially first thing in the morning, meditating with my physical body and checking my organs, seeing what is actually going on. How does my gut feel today? How's my stomach? Am I breathing this morning? How do I feel structurally? Am I holding tension anywhere in my body? So I would do a practice where I'm actually starting to harness my own awareness of my physical health through observation, through feeling, whilst it's still comfortable to feel. Because it's much easier to feel your physical body when you're healthy, when you're in balance. When you start to feel ill and you start to feel run down, or you're in pain, your perception of your body is skewed because you're looking and feeling through a filter of pain, of imbalance. And this becomes important when we start to go deeper into the energetics of this, because whenever we look at something through a filter of imbalance, we will inherently find more imbalance, and we can actually start to create more imbalance in our own system. So yes, we need to be able to check for things that are out of balance in our body, but we also need to be able to do that in a space where we can remain quite neutral and we can remain compassionate with ourselves so that we don't add to what we're already holding. The third thing is that I will always check energetically what is going on with me. And the more still you can make yourself with this practice, the more grounded you are, the easier it's going to be for you to access your energy body. The first place that any type of illness, disease, or trauma will manifest is always the field, is always the energy field, because this is our most subtle and often most overlooked aspect of our human experience. And many people are not in tune or cannot feel their own energy field, and yet it's there and it moves and it's being interacted with through all sorts of environmental stimuli. The way our energy field moves and vibrates will affect eventually our fluidic body and our physical body. So there will be a nervous system response when there is imbalances in our energy field. This happens over time. It will not necessarily happen immediately. So what we've got here is a very generous spectrum and timeline to work with. And that spectrum and timeline looks like, at the very, very early stages, subtle energetics, subtle impressions and movements in the field. And at the very other end of the spectrum, it's more explicit experiences of physical illness, disharmony, pain, etc. And going beyond that, we have the realm where the whole spectrum has been overlooked, neglected, not treated, misdiagnosed, etc. And we have the presence of chronic illnesses, chronic disease, chronic structural complaints that persist and repeat over time. So working with this experience and this generous timeline, this is a timeline often from subtle energetic awareness all the way through to chronic condition, is a timeline of, I would say, several years. Chronic conditions do not happen suddenly. You will not experience a chronic health condition suddenly. And this is what's really sometimes quite surprising for people to hear. That, for example, an autoimmune condition doesn't just suddenly develop overnight. You might suddenly become aware because for the last several years you haven't been paying attention. But that doesn't mean that your body hasn't been experiencing and really trying to support you, and your immune system hasn't been trying to protect you for many, many years. Often, what will happen is we will experience something physically, and then we will start to try to resolve only at a physical level what we're experiencing. So another way that we can keep ourselves really healthy and balanced is to always consider that what we're experiencing, including illness, also has emotional influences and emotional root causes. Especially if we're repeating illnesses every single year, we need to start to understand what is it within us that we're feeling, what is it within us that we're creating, and why. So when I was going through that experience in my 20s of getting a chest infection every single winter and having to take time off work, it took probably 4 years before I was able to sit down with myself and say, okay, maybe this is lifestyle related. Maybe I don't take enough time for myself to really de-stress. Maybe I don't have a good relationship with stress. Then I started to examine some of the things I was eating and noticing that, particularly in the winter, I was reaching for foods that would inherently create inflammation in the body. Foods such as dairy, particularly processed dairy and gluten, which will all affect the gastrointestinal tract, will always affect our digestive system and our metabolism and our levels of toxicity in the body, and generating a lot of mucus, which is a really serious issue when it's not resolved over time, can lead to serious other illnesses. Generating a lot of mucus in my system was one of the things I became aware of. So when I started to look into, actually, maybe instead of seeking a solution outside of me, I can figure out what I'm doing and try to change what I'm consuming, that led to a massive shift in my health. So detoxing, for example, and detoxing from foods that are now very well documented to cause inflammation in the body, and inflammation is one of the leading causes of illness and of disease, and is also prevalent when there's unresolved trauma in the body. This is a really important aspect. So nutrition and diet is really, really important. But it's easier to say than it is to do. Because, of course, when we start to get busy, we start to get maybe a little bit more stressed. Maybe we don't prepare that summer salad. Maybe we don't make our own soup. Maybe we reach out for something on the shelf and it contains so many ingredients that we really don't know what the effects are on the body, especially over the long term. Contains lots of preservatives, artificial sweeteners, and chemicals that are affecting the natural levels of the natural biochemical levels of the body. Now, as we become more sensitive, our cellular health becomes more important. So for those of us who are working energetically, maintaining balance in our bodies at a biochemical level becomes even more important, because we can feel any slight imbalance. So I'm not a detox expert, so I'm not here to tell you how to detox yourself. But there are lots of natural herbs, supplements, and plants that you can work with that will support you to rebalance your system. And for me, working with medicinal mushrooms, reducing my stress levels, nourishing myself in winter instead of pushing myself in the winter, eliminating mucus as much as I could from my system, drinking lots of water, reducing caffeine. These are all some of the things that I did to overcome what was a repeated annual experience. And finally, the big thing here is to really recognize that sometimes being ill actually is giving us something. And humans have often lots of unconscious distortions in the ways that we get our needs met. And we don't know they're distorted because it's unconscious. So we have no idea that this is what we're doing, but at some level it's playing out within us. And by the time it reaches our physical body, it starts to get our attention. We can sometimes misinterpret what this is actually all about. So for me, detoxification, changing my diet and eliminating excessive stress from my lifestyle also pointed me towards something deeper, which was that I needed to make bigger changes in the ways that I was being gratified And by gratified, I mean the feedback loops that I was getting when it came to working, overworking, and feeling stress. So for me, that had always been quite normalized, to work really hard, to feel a certain high and persistent level of stress, and to consider that this is just part of being a high achiever. And I had to reevaluate my relationship with achievement, with validation, with my sense of reward and how I felt reward, and also my sense of self. And when I started to do that, what became more important to me than any of those things was my health. When we start to go into these deeper levels to understand ourselves, we will inherently arrive in a really powerful landscape of self-inquiry where we can start to ask ourselves these questions, and we feel safe enough and open and receptive enough to receive the answers. And when we do, we change. And when we change, our bodies and our health also change. So often we struggle to do this because we're scared. We're scared of confronting ourselves. We're scared of facing unconscious aspects of ourselves and what we do. And that can keep us in cycles of repeated illness, because going down into those deeper layers, where very few people will actually go to seek the truth of their condition, reveals us to ourselves. And once we've seen that, we can't go back. We have to make changes. Once we see that, part of ourselves has to recognize that we didn't get it right. We didn't know necessarily everything we needed to know to keep ourselves in a state of balance. Therefore, we're still learning. And for many people, it's easier and more comfortable to stay at a physical level and consider that illness is just bad luck, or is just the body's process that it's going through, and it can be treated and resolved purely through diet or medication, and it can't. I often encounter this in people who are on the spiritual path or on a spiritual path, who are dedicated in certain ways to eating certain foods or to doing certain dietary practices, and yet they're still in a state of deep imbalance. But on the surface of it, they're eating all the right things. They're doing yoga, meditation, etc. But what's going missing is that key piece related to identity, which is the emotional component of every single illness. And if you're interested in reading more about this or learning more about this, I've written a blog post which is about how chronic conditions inherently reflect our state of consciousness. Chronic conditions are not separate from us. We can only evolve and grow and deepen our own level of consciousness and rise in our own highest frequency and potential as long as we have harmonized our physical body. So you can talk all the spiritual talk that you want, and you may hear people doing that, but the truth is the body speaks. You may be talking lots of scientific fact about health, but if you are fundamentally ill, if you have a chronic condition, it really doesn't matter what you know or what you're sharing, because the proof is in your body and in your health. And letting yourself go into that jungle of inquiry, that deep and perhaps dark and also exciting area where you start to go, okay, why am I really experiencing this? This is going to help you to fundamentally change, to rewire your nervous system, to change your entire health, and it will lead to a really important shift in your mindset as well. Because once you've come to that level of awareness, you will want more of that. It will feel so good and so empowering. And unfortunately, we are living in a world where the main currency at the moment is a fear-based currency. And for those of you who've read my blog post on how fear affects our immune systems, you will have understood, and I've explained in quite detail, the way that our biochemistry is affected by fear, the way our brain is affected by fear, and the corresponding effect that has on our immune system, on our organs, and on our inherent sense of health. So fear is not, oh, I feel scared. This is what's really important. Lots of people who are chronically ill will tell you they don't have fear. I'm not scared of anything. What do you mean fear and immunity? What do you mean fear causes immunity? Because they're only able to recognize fear from a perspective of looking at a word in a dictionary. Fear is mostly unconscious, is often held in the body, comes from our inherent belief systems and identity, leads to contraction in the tissues, and is essentially an indicator of where we need to heal and open ourselves up deeper to ourselves. Fear is, of course, now being perpetuated through so many different sources that leads to responses, that triggers nervous system responses, that triggers opinions. All of this is also fear-based, because ultimately, fear is movement. Fear is not flow, fear is movement. When we flow, we can't get ill. When our body flows, when our fluids flow, it's very difficult to get ill because everything's flowing. When our energy system flows and our system is open, we flow. We cannot stagnate. We don't build up density that then becomes a seismic task to try to resolve or excavate. Same with our bodies. Inherently, when we are holding chronic conditions, there are levels of fear that we are being shown through our physical body that is our own responsibility to go in and start to explore. And this is where healing work is so, so important, particularly for people who are experiencing chronic conditions. However, it can also be a double-edged sword, because by the time someone has experienced a chronic condition, it's solidified in their consciousness that, oh, well, this is just how they are. Or, okay, well, I'm ill. I've got this autoimmune problem. I've had it since I was 4 years old. There's nothing I can do about it. Or I hear a lot of women talking about their wombs in that way. You know, I've always had polycystic ovaries, you know, since I can remember, since I was like 14, 15. And that's just how it is. I take my medication. That's where I am. Now that builds an identity that is important for that person. And until that person is willing to question and challenge that as an identity structure, they will never be able to stop feeding it. Because all types of conditions, all illnesses are states of consciousness. There will be specific frequencies related to all these conditions, and they can all be reversed if the root causes are treated. And the root causes are usually unresolved trauma held in the nervous system, deep fear held in the body and held in the unconscious, imbalances and destructive habits when it comes to nutrition, exercise, lifestyle factors. So we can do so much for ourselves by asking what the problem is that we're really experiencing. And the problem is never the symptom. The symptom is the symptom. The symptom is a mirror and is an indicator of where you need to go, but it's not the problem. So in the work that I do with my clients, wherever they come in with whatever type of condition, they will often present a wide array of symptoms, scattered symptoms that often have never been able to be resolved through medicine or through any other types of therapeutic work, because they're not going deep enough into what the actual root causes are. And when they come to see me and we go through the consultation process and treatment starts, what they start to do is recognize and realize that their body is not fighting them. These problems, these illnesses are not something they just have to live with. And actually they can be treated with minimal invasion, absolutely safely, to the point where they do not reoccur. And that is what you call healing work. Healing work resolves the root causes so that symptoms don't reoccur. And it takes courage. It really does take a lot of strength and courage. And often people only find that courage when they're at the last wit's end, really. When they have exhausted all the other options, when the pain has become too much, when they're realizing that they're going back every year, the medication doses are getting higher, or the doctors are now doing trial and error, just prescribing different types of medication, more symptoms are emerging, more medication for the symptoms. This is often what happens. Then their lives are affected, their lifestyles are affected, and as a result, that's usually when people start to come in for treatment, because by that time, they are desperate. There's nothing wrong with that, because we all have to go on this journey. I went on that journey myself. I really only started to become aware of what was possible to heal once I had reached my breaking point. Because when we're in our comfort zone, we are too comfortable to challenge ourselves. We are busy feeding our identity structures. We are busy trying to maintain who we think we are. And until it starts to crumble beneath us, that's when we will start to seek a different way. Seek a different way of being with ourselves. So this type of work to heal our physical body is so much more than just the physical. It's so much more than diet and nutrition. However, lifestyle factors are very important, but we do need to start to work with the underlying root causes. And these can be in utero trauma, in utero shock. This can be ancestral trauma that's being passed through. It can be epigenetic expressions. It can be birth trauma that has never been resolved, that's affected nervous system functioning, that's affected structurally, and then that has a repercussion when it comes to our organ health, our visceral functioning. It can also be life events. It's never usually one specific thing, but it's an accumulation. So healing work helps us to unravel all these layers. And we have to start to acknowledge, finally, that our physical body is extremely benevolent. It's extremely generous. It's extremely hardworking. And it's our most loyal companion in this world. And it's always, always desperately trying hard to maintain us, to teach us, to show us that health is always available. When we start to relate differently, recognize that our body isn't something that just has to get ill, isn't something that is just experiencing illness because of bad luck, or has failed us, or is working against us, as sometimes I've heard clients talk about. They feel like because of what they've been through, their body now is attacking them. We have to understand why our body feels like it's under attack and needs to go to such lengths to protect itself. That very rarely is only a physical condition. We are emotional beings. We cannot separate our physiology from our emotionality. We cannot do that. When we compartmentalize ourselves as humans, when we start splitting ourselves and we refuse to treat the whole person, we inherently sell ourselves short. So for me, treatment has to be holistically orientated. So I will always give my clients physical work, structural work, visceral healing for their organs, trauma work, work on their mindset, emotional release work, that will always need to be done. Spiritual work will also need to be done, particularly if they're going through a spiritual experience, or if they're going through very deep grief, loss of loved ones, if they're going through existential crisis, if they're facing something very deeply challenging in their energy system that they've not managed to get resolved with anybody else, and then supporting that with specific practices. So I will always give my clients tailored practices that they need to do based on the work that has presented during the session. And this is to support the work that we're doing every single week. And it's amazing because there's a massive difference between the clients who who do that consistently and the ones who struggle to practice what I share with them. And now these practices I'm sharing with them, whether it's movement practice or a meditation practice or sometimes it's a really rational, logical, okay, you need to sit down with a piece of paper and this is what you need to do. This exercise is going to take you from here to here. Sometimes it's something like that. There's a massive difference between the clients that will come and say, every single week, I've done everything you told me. And they will always say, I've done everything you told me to do. I feel completely different. As against the clients that will say, you know what, it rained on a Monday and then on a Tuesday, I found myself really busy at work, and then it was Wednesday and I was really tired. I didn't manage to do anything then. And then Thursday came and I kind of forgot what you told me to do. And then on Friday, blah, 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 right? There will always be an excuse when we are not committed to being our own healer. There will always be an excuse. And what that simply means is that we don't care enough to be the solution. Now, again, this is a trauma response. Sometimes clients resist their own health and well-being practices because it's their only way of exerting a no in the world. It's their only way of rebelling. It's their only way of experiencing some sort of power, is to say, no, I didn't do it. Maybe sometimes it's a reflection of this deep lack of self-worth. They just can't find the motivation to actually do a practice that is going to benefit them immediately. And I will always support my clients to, first of all, become aware if they're doing that consistently. And secondly, we will start working with that therapeutically. Because when we do trauma work, and it's very deep and it's unearthing, and sometimes it's challenging, we don't always feel so motivated to do a set of specific practices every day. Sometimes people are leading very chaotic lives and it's difficult. But if it is difficult and it's proving difficult and it's impeding recovery and health, that's when we will start to work with what the root causes are of why these things are so challenging to do. The key thing is grounding. And I share time and time again, all illness is movement. If you're still, you cannot get ill. It's physiologically impossible, if you are deadly still in your energy field and grounded, for you to experience any sort of distortion in your energy body or in your physical body for a prolonged enough period of time for you to get ill. So grounding is not just for your nervous system and your mental health, but also for your spiritual health, is fundamental. And because it's so fundamental, because it's so potent, because it's so immediately beneficial, when people do it, they go, whoa, I instantly feel pain dissolve. I instantly feel my mind is still, my mind is clear. I can instantly feel a connection with my body. I'm sleeping better. I'm waking up and feeling alert and ready for my day. I'm calm. All of these immediate benefits. But then it comes to the resistance. Noticing when we resist the very medicine that we need the most. That in itself is a place of deep revelation. Sometimes it takes for someone else to point it out. But if we get into the habit of finding it ourselves, recognizing it ourselves, okay, I'm just noticing I've really resisted myself for the past 3 days. I've not done any of the practices I know I need to do to keep myself in a state of balance and centeredness. I'm not eating right. I'm not sleeping well. I'm relying on external stimulants to fuel me. Bear in mind, this is part of our natural ebb and flow of being human. When we start to notice that, there's a big difference between leaving it for 3 days and leaving it for 3 years. If we leave it for 3 days, we can very quickly regain our balance. We will all drop off this wagon at some point. We will drop off, we will have a great barbecue, we will go to sleep at 1 o'clock in the morning when we know we need to be in bed at 10:30. We will eat 4 Oreos instead of just having one or none. So we're going to fall off this wagon. But if we stay off the wagon, we will soon find ourselves lost by the wayside. Again, our body is generous. It gives us years and years to keep making the same mistake before it starts to show us, you know what? Can't deal with this anymore. You need to change. So one of the articles I've written on my blog is called Why Blaming Toxicity on Your Body is the Same as Blaming the Weather on the Weatherman. Because effectively, when we look at our bodies and say, you are what's wrong, we are missing the point. We are what's wrong. We are also what's right. So, journeying, healing ourselves to get to this place of self-awareness, embodied self-awareness, because lots of people can talk about this from a place of mental and psychological theory and awareness, but the body and our bodies really, really will tell the truth about whether we live it. Getting to this place where we can face ourselves and empower ourselves is a journey of life. It's a journey that wherever you are, you can start now today, and start by doing very, very small things. When you start by doing small things, gradually they will accumulate. You will start to get feedback. You will start to feed off the feedback. You will start to feed off the insight. You will start to learn. If you are only waiting for this big bang experience of health to emerge, if we only ever look after ourselves when once a year we say, okay, I'm going to do a digital detox, a water fast, I'm going to take time off work, I'm going to work out every day, I'm going to do yoga in the morning at 6 o'clock, I'm going to do all of this, and it only happens 2 weeks out of every year. That is not balance. Because what are we doing for the rest of those weeks? We need to start to recognize that we live with our bodies, and our bodies are us. Our bodies reflect our base level of consciousness. And looking after our bodies is probably the most basic thing that we can do for our health and for our spiritual evolution. Looking after our bodies is basic, right? When we are out of tune with our body, forget about being in tune with our energy field. Forget about being in tune with anything more subtle and anything more mystical and vaster than what we have immediately in front of us. If we cannot master that, if we cannot care deeply, if we cannot learn from our physical conditions and our physical reality, it will make it very difficult to see what is not clearly and explicitly shown through the material realm. And we are all seeking that something deeper, that magic within us. We are all seeking our higher potentials. We are all seeking that sense of deep bliss and harmony. And the way we access that is by healing our bodies, by rebalancing our nervous systems, by changing our lifestyles, and by being willing to challenge the identities that we have built upon sickness, so that we can build a new identity based on health.